Welcome back to On the Edge with me, Theo Chalmers, and my special guest, Anthony Beckett. So, Anthony, just before the break, we had established then that the true colour of Mars is sort of buff-coloured with the blue sky.
Yeah, using NASA's own calibration, that's what we see.
I've got to ask, though, isn't it known as a red planet because from Earth it looks red? So if it looks red from Earth, maybe it is red?
Well, it actually is, because the ground is like got a reddish tint to the rock, like you mentioned. It was iron oxide, effectively, isn't it? Which has got a rust-like, rust colour. So yeah, it's a red planet, but the sky is a blue colour. So for some reason, NASA seem to have taken it upon themselves in the last 20 years, or rather the missions since the 1990s onwards, to sell us Mars with a red sky and hide the colour blue. The question is why? Why would they do that?
Well, isn't it also about hiding the colour green, possibly?
Again, yeah. I mean, one of the problems with the calibration is that you saw on the calibration target that the blue target shone bright red, but the green was like just brown colour.
So that means that if there was anything green on Mars,
yeah.
If there was, and maybe we'll see that there is, but
it would show up green. Brown.
And then it wouldn't look like chlorophyll or...
Well, that's the thing, because I mean the whole point of the Viking mission, it was sold to the public as a search for life on Mars, but all the mission priorities was actually that it was a geological investigation. It wasn't. They sold the life on Mars search to the people, like for the press basically, to get people on board. But they only had experiments really focused on geology, apart from the label release experiment basically. And
what release experiment?
The label release experiment, which is label release. Label release. Yeah, it was an isotopic. It's called the label release experiment. It's basically, I can't remember the details of it, but basically it was looking for components that, say, bacteria would create in the soil, and it tested positive for potentially bacteria in the soil. I think there was a gas chromatograph which was looking for some other kind of chemical, and that didn't find what it was looking for, but that tested negative.
This is that experiment you talked about earlier?
This is a different experiment. Yeah, and because the other one tested negative, the gas chromatography, basically what that was looking for was pieces of organic molecules, and it didn't find any. But the problem is they did run the same experiment in Antarctica, and the gas chromatograph didn't find any evidence of the bacteria, but where they actually really did find bacteria in the soil.
Okay,
so that particular experiment was flawed, but then that was used to basically throw out the data from which tested positive for life in 1976.
Okay, I've got a text. So this is from Simon Lewis in Morecambe. I think this is Simon Lewis, who was a guest on this show talking about the moon a few months ago. Hello, Simon, if it is you. He says, hello, Theo. Does Anthony find NASA helpful in explaining the colours, or is it never a straight answer? So have you asked NASA?
Not me personally, no. There's a guy called Richard Hoagland, who's one of the main guys, one of the main researchers, who he got interested in. He was a consultant for NASA at one point. He basically was a media type, effectively, and he got interested in this research in the early 80s, and he was one of the people who kind of were effectively lobbying NASA to actually kind of change mission priorities to look at the things later on. But as far as the colours of the Mars is concerned, they basically have questioned NASA, and NASA keep coming back with the response that if they say anything, they just say that they're showing true colour images, or they don't know. There's actually an article was published by the BBC basically saying that NASA claim that they don't know how to calibrate their images.
They don't know how to calibrate their images?
That was from about 2004-ish, I think. But so basically,
somewhat ridiculous.
NASA's position is that they are still working out how to calibrate their images properly.
Okay, well,
that was 2004. Maybe it's changed.
Seems I would actually say that Richard Hoagland's website is fascinating if you want to find it. The Enterprise Mission, I think
that's
it's called, isn't it?
EnterpriseMission.com.
Yes, yeah. It is absolutely fascinating. It's also got an amazing series of like an essay, if you like, with photographs about Iapetus, which is one of the moons of Saturn, which is the extraordinary moon that's one side is black and one side is white. And that is stunning bit of stuff as well. But we're not talking about that today. Let's go to another image then. Let's go to image 10.
Yes, this summarises what we saw before, from Viking missions and from independent researchers calibrating the data. We see Mars with a blue sky.
So this is NASA's version on the left, and this is the correct recalibrated version on the right.
Well, either way, both show a blue sky.
Oh, okay.
So because it's from Viking. So the question is, why from the 1990s onwards, NASA effectively not telling the truth. I would say some people might say lying. Well, we'll look at the next image.
This is a good one, isn't it?
This is taken from the Mars Express, Mars Express was the European Space Agency's orbiter, which carried a Beagle 2. It carried the Beagle 2 lander, which failed.
Failed, yeah.
But this particular image is of the Gusev, what's called the Gusev crater. And the kind of large crater is basically the area where the rover called Spirit is currently exploring. Okay. So Spirit landed in that area.
And this is the image that they've actually released, is it?
This image was actually up on the European Space Agency's website in the news page. It was released one day, and the next day they replaced the particular image with a version that showed the green to be kind of brown colour. But you can still find this. But you can still find the original photograph in the archives on the websites.
So okay, well, I don't think we need it up anymore, but it's quite clear that in that original image released by European Space Agency,
it was showing green coloration in the area where Spirit, one of the rovers, is currently wandering around exploring.
Now, I suppose it could be copper oxide of some kind.
Oh yeah, well, that's the thing. You can have green minerals, you can have blue minerals, but the point is, with the way NASA have not calibrated the images, it means you cannot see the blue minerals or green minerals. They just show up brown on Mars.
Just brown minerals.
Yes. So for some reason they've stopped doing that. Well, obviously everyone knows why we're focusing on green, because green's if you're looking for any indication of something like of life on Earth, one thing you'd look for would like something something like a green foliage or something. I mean, we're talking about plant life really, aren't we? Chlorophyll-based plant life, and it's an assumption. It is a leap to say that. If plant life had evolved on Mars, that it would still use the same process in chemistry. It's still a leap. But if we're treating this from a scientific perspective, we have to use inductive reasoning, which is a methodology of science. Mm-hmm. And so what works on Earth, we would then obviously use that on Mars. And basically, we were looking for green patches as indicators of life on Mars.
Well, the interesting thing about Mars's atmosphere is that it's very heavy in CO2, isn't it? Carbon dioxide.
Yeah, I think it's 90% carbon dioxide.
And CO2, of course, is plant food, isn't it? On planet Earth, plants feed on CO2. They feed on sunlight, and they use CO2, and then they synthesize oxygen.
Yeah. But yes, the atmosphere on Mars is a lot thinner than Earth. I think it's down to about 1%. It's around that. It's about 100 less than it is on the Earth. But still, the carbon dioxide's there. I mean, carbon dioxide is just I think it's less than 1% on Earth, so it's still probably about the same amount of carbon dioxide available to any entity on the surface, effectively.
Yeah, I mean,
pressure's a lot different. That's all.
Yeah, well, the gravity is about 38% of Earth.
Yeah, it's about a third. Yeah.
But if you think about CO2, it's carbon and oxygen.
That's right. Yeah.
So. There is oxygen there, so the plants could easily strip the carbon out and make themselves with it.
There's also oxygen in the water as well, because that's one thing we've not mentioned so far is the water, evidence for water on Mars. If you're looking for life on Mars, two things you look for, a food source, where you've kind of got the carbon dioxide for that, and you also you need to have water. Well, for years, Mars is a cold, frigid planet, at least we've been told. We know that temperatures in the equator regions get above zero sometimes, so there's evidence for the temperatures get to the level where you can actually have like liquid water run on the surface. Now, there's evidence going back quite several years from the Mars Global Surveyor spacecraft, which we don't have any images for, but basically show what looks like runoff water or like little springs coming out the side of craters. Mm-hmm. And independent researchers for years were crying out, saying, look, this is evidence of running water on Mars. It's an interesting story that most of the images that come from, say, 1994 onwards, up until probably about 3 years ago, were all controlled by a private contractor, not NASA. They didn't have like the right over it. They subcontracted it to Michael Malin, who runs a company called Malin Space Science Systems. Michael Malin just happens to be a former CIA analyst as well.
Sorry, he happens to be?
He's a former CIA analyst, and he formed his own company because he's an image analyst expert. He was then given the contract for handling all the images coming from the orbiters from Mars. Mm-hmm. And so basically, for years, independent researchers had found all these evidence for running water on Mars through these stain marks on the sides of these craters and hillsides. And when NASA never acknowledged it, they never saw it as evidence of water. When Michael Malin lost the contract for the orbiters a few years ago, and soon afterwards he had a press conference announcing that with all the data he collected, they'd actually found evidence of running water on Mars, and they showed all these photographs of these stain marks that all these independent researchers years before had been finding and telling people about, which NASA never took as being evidence. So it's kind of interesting. It's almost like political games are being played within NASA there.
All right. Well, we've seen some evidence of greenery of some kind, whether it's mineral or whether it's